there's not really anyone who gets as much scorn as a criminal defendant, you know. And a lot of them come from outcast groups, and there's a larger policy question there of, you know, why is our prison population, why is our criminal defendant population, you know, so heavily represented by people of color, people in lower income brackets, people who grow up in disadvantaged or fractured family structures and things like that. So you get all kinds of folks, and the ones who are nice to you, well, it's easy to be civil and polite to them. It's the ones who are more difficult. And the challenge for me has been, how do I see them as God sees them? And I had an experience when I was in law school which helped me get my head around that. I was a apartment resident assistant in J. Crocker Towers up at KU. And one of my co-RAs was killed by a drunk driver. And we were all woken up in the middle of the night, given the bad news, and it was tough for everybody on staff. Her name was Shira. She was a wonderful person. She helped get extra food for kids. She was involved in her church. You know, why her? Why her? Well, I went to the preliminary hearing of the man who had driven into their car and killed her. And he got within, you know, closer to me than I am to you right now. And you have that 1 minute of thinking of vengeance. I could just reach out and do something really bad to him right there. And, you know, the victim, you know, my friend, my co-RA, had lots of supporters in the room. And all of us, you know, felt tremendous anger. Maybe you would even call it hatred towards that guy. And in the back of the room was the guy's family. Mom, dad, I think a couple of siblings. And back there was his mom crying for him. And it occurred to me that she saw him differently than all the rest of us did. He had made a terrible mistake, one that was going to change his whole life. He had taken somebody else's life. He was a total mess up. But he was still her son. And he was in trouble, and he was hurting, and she still loved him. She saw him probably as God sees us when we fall, when we commit sin, when we hurt other people, when we fall short. And the thought occurred to me is, if that's how God sees some of the people we despise the most, who are we to look on them and treat them differently than God? Are we above God? Do we think we have higher moral standards than God? No. And that kind of sense of, how do I look at that person as God sees at them? It doesn't mean you don't hold them accountable. It doesn't mean that you allow yourself to be abused or taken advantage of or anything like that. But it does make you more humble. It does make you listen more. If you can see each person as having inherent value and being loved by God, regardless of what they've done, and that their crime or their sin or their alleged crime or sin is not the end of who they are. It's the worst moment of their life, but they have the rest of their life to live, and they're going to become something different than that if they get the chance. You have very, very sympathetic people. Sometimes you have people who are trying to game the system and take advantage of the system, and sometimes they're in between, and you don't really know what side they fall on. How do you still be responsible with that person, do your duty under the rules of ethics, and still have compassion for that person? It is easy to become cynical in this job, and most people, a lot of criminal defense attorneys are. And it results in some pretty tragic miscarriages of justice, because in that moment where you start thinking that this guy deserves what he's getting, then you start stepping back from your pledge that you made when you became an attorney of being a zealous advocate for that person. It does give a person a very unique opportunity to be beside someone at possibly the worst moment in their life, when they've done the worst thing and they're totally exposed and they are vulnerable and they're behind plexiglass and you're on the phone on the other side with them, and to offer them some grace at that moment. Jail is not a great place for a defense attorney to evangelize. That's not an appropriate role for a defense attorney. Chaplain maybe, but it is a possibility. It is a great opportunity to be with someone in one of their darkest moments and to stand beside them. And in that sense, you know, it fulfills a role that Jesus has, which is, even in our fallen nature, is to still be beside us when we don't deserve it, still be a friend to us, to still be a savior to us even when we don't deserve it. Most of the time, I'm the only person in that room that guy or gal has on their side. And it's a privilege. And the way that I treat my clients gets replicated by the people who I employ. And I've seen it with other law firms too, where if the lead attorney is frustrated and angry and impatient with clients, then their assistant, the next time they pick up the phone to talk to that client, will reflect that same kind of frustration and anger and impatience. That's the real catch. When people are nice to each other, your faith is easy, right? It's easy to be nice to others who are nice to you. Even Jesus said that. But it's more difficult when a judge is being really unfair or being overly harsh to you in a way that you feel like is unjust. It's difficult and challenging when a prosecutor is just being completely unreasonable and unkind for reasons which maybe you don't understand, or maybe you do and it's not right. How do you still treat that person with compassion? How do you treat that person with respect? And by and large, I've had to say, whatever my public role is, my public personality kind of has to be the same as my private personality too. I just find it too difficult to have that kind of divided personality where I'm one way at home and I'm another way at work. If I'm going to be forgiving and patient and the kind of person I want to be at home, I kind of need to do that at work too. I think it's very easy for people to say, hey, this is business. These are business questions. Jesus doesn't have a dog in this fight. But what have we learned since the recession? And the fiscal malfeasance and greediness took us all down. It took the whole country down and large parts of the world. And so the decisions you make in your work life, you do need to filter those through your faith as well. Granted, you have duties, you have obligations, and it's not as easy. You can't always reconcile those easily with 3 sentences on a postcard. You have to work at it. But ultimately, kindness can almost never go wrong with kindness. That's what people remember. You can say a lot, but if you don't say it with kindness, they're not going to remember what you said.